Welcome back to Real Talk with Susan Stone and Kristina Supler. We are full-time moms and attorneys bringing our student defense legal practice to life with real, candid conversations.
Kristina, is this the first time we're recording a podcast and we're not together?
It is, and it feels weird. I feel so alone.
I was going to say, I feel so disconnected from you. This is so weird. Everyone, you know that we're always attached at the hip, but I'm in New York and
I'm in our studio in Cleveland, Ohio, and we're going to do this with technology today. And I think we're going to be talking about technology a lot today. So she's like, what are we talking about today?
Oh my gosh. We're going to talk about the changes to the SAT because there's a lot happening. And I'm going to also want to delve into, is the ACT going to do the same thing? Oh, it's the time of year where everybody's trying to get their last scores in before college applications go out. So good time for this talk. And with that, why don't you introduce our guest?
Sure. We are joined today by Mark Coffin. Mark's the proud owner of Academy Custom Test Prep. ACTP helps students with the ACT, SAT, PSAT, and GRE tests, as well as Common App essays and other college admissions essays. So, Mark, thanks for joining us today.
Well, happy to be here.
So, Mark, big changes are coming to the SAT in 2024.
Yeah,
Describe the
Dun,
changes.
dun, dun.
Dun, dun. So can you describe the changes?
Sure, it's a complete revamp. The College Board, who runs both the PSAT and SAT testing, they make up the tests and score them and all that. They made major changes to the SAT in 2016. So this isn't a long time for them to have had this new test. They made it then much closer to the ACT. Now, effective with the PSAT this fall, they're given traditionally in the high schools to juniors, sophomores and juniors in October of each year. And so this fall, both sophomores and juniors will take the new version of the PSAT, which will be very much like the new version of the SAT. The first new SAT will be in March of 24. So current juniors, who pretty much have already taken some of these tests, have taken the old the current SAT. The new one will be for current sophomores and younger kids starting next March. Now, a current sophomore could, in fact, take SAT tests this fall. There are 4 testing dates, and take the current version on paper. But starting with March, it's going to be a very different format for a number of reasons. Number one, the test is going to be completely online. So there'll be no printed tests. Students will take it at testing centers, not at home, designated as they do now, but they can use their own computers or a computer will be provided. When they go in and get ready for the test and start, their computer will basically be frozen. So they can't use it for research or texting or anything else they might want. And they download through a link the new SAT test. And so they will have their own test on their machine or on a provided machine that's online, and everything must be done online. The test will be shorter. It's currently a little over 3 hours. It's going to be 2 hours. They're shortening it by combining some of the sections and just simply reducing the number of questions. The current SAT has a reading section and a writing or grammar section. And those are now separate sections. You finish one and then go on when the time's up to the next one. And then it currently has 2 math sections, one without a calculator. You can't use a calculator. And then one with a calculator. And again, you do the non-calculator, you finish. When the time's up, you go on to the next one.
Wait, Mark, I just want to interrupt. How do they know whether you have a calculator or non-calculator? Do the proctors manage that?
The proctors are walking around and they see you with a calculator. Okay. You're kicked out.
So it sounds like it's a really different test.
It's different in a lot of other ways too. One hugely important way, which I'll get to after I've covered the simpler questions. So the current 2 sections that are reading and grammar, they call it writing and language, are going to be combined into one section. So you don't finish
That's a big
one into one.
change.
That's a big change.
That's a big change.
In the reading part, in the current test, you generally have around 11 paragraphs to read, 8 to 11, and then you answer 10 or 11 questions about each paragraph. So you have to be not only a perceptive reader, but a pretty quick reader because it'll be a lot of time. The new test will reduce this, I think, to 4 passages for the reading with one question, and just be a paragraph, with only one question per paragraph. The reasoning is that students will have more time to absorb the material and answer one sort of more broader question about the point of the paragraph. So they have more time to ponder it, in effect.
Mark, is that easier?
Yeah, it sounds like they're in some ways watering the test down. Am I wrong?
The questions are not easy. I don't think it's easier. It's easier in the time sense. You're not hurried to read a paragraph and answer 10 or 11 questions because you have to have pretty good recall to read a paragraph and then immediately go to the questions and remember 11 different answers. Now it'll be one answer. And I've taken a practice test, Khan Academy, which many people are familiar with, is
Sure.
an online practicing entity for basically the SAT. They now have a couple of these new format practice tests. So I've taken one. The question's not, I'm not a junior in high school, so I may be somewhat better at taking these tests than some kids, but it's a fairly difficult question, I thought, for a junior.
Okay, so sorry to
They're taking the
get you.
time management pressure out of it, but the substance of the questions is still weighty.
Yes, I think so. They're trying to give kids more time. The SAT compared to the ACT has never been a time crunch the way the ACT is. The ACT is much more direct. And so there are many more questions in the same 3-hour period. For example, the math section in the ACT is 60 questions in 60 minutes, and you got to move. SAT was never that time crunch, but they're dropping it from 3 hours to 2, dramatically reducing the number of questions. And the whole idea is to make it an easier test.
So let's go back. What are the other changes? Because I want to make sure we
Okay.
cover them all.
I told you they combine the two, reading and grammar.
Mhm.
Grammar will have much more emphasis on vocabulary. The SAT, before they changed it in 2016, was much more of a vocabulary test than the then new SAT. They reduced, you really had to study vocabulary if you took an SAT in 2005.
So are we back to that? Are we back to studying vocabulary?
Somewhat. I think so. Somewhat. But there'll be more emphasis on vocabulary. Not so much, you don't have to define words, but they will have a blank in a sentence and ask you which word best fills in that blank. So you don't have to know the definition, but you have to know pretty much the context of words, how they're used. And some words will be absurd. You just wouldn't use them. It might be farmer where the right word is horse. I'm using simplistic examples, but you would never put farmer in that blank. So some of them will be obvious, but some won't be. It'll be difficult. So anyway, those are two of the changes, the making the math well, maybe I didn't get to that. The math is now going to be all with a calculator. Fewer questions than the 2 previous sections, but you can use a calculator anywhere. And you don't bring a calculator. The calculator is on the screen. One of the big changes with this test going online is that you have to be adept at taking the test online. With a paper test, going forwards and back, skipping a problem, but coming back to it later because you circled it on your paper, those things are second nature to kids. Now, I'm much older than a junior in high school. I think many of these kids are much more adept at online testing than I am.
There's all sorts of online testing now, for sure.
Yeah.
I know, but I would struggle because I remember that taking the SAT and seeing something that was challenging, saying, okay, I'm going to come back. And I would just jot where to go back. But now you've got to manage and negotiate everything on the screen.
Well, you can have, to help with that, you can have scratch paper. Obviously, you can't bring anything other than blank paper. Well, they'll provide scratch paper. So you can write down section 1, I want to come back to number 11 or something. But you still got to be able to do it on the screen. Now, there are arrows. Kids know how to do that. But it's another step, I think, that just makes it, for me, it makes it much more challenging to take this test online. So essentially, the format is largely the same. The material tested, largely the same, just many fewer questions. Their thinking is that by making it shorter and online, I don't know how they come up with this logic, but that it will appeal to many more kids, that it'll be fairer. I don't know what makes this fairer, but that's what they put in their press releases. They think more kids will take it. I think that may be true, but not because they've improved the test. I think kids will be attracted by the 2 hours instead of 3. These tests are no fun.
For sure.
And
So what motivated or caused SAT to make these sweeping changes?
there's no question that these tests, ACT or SAT, are culturally biased. If you come from a good school system, a nuclear family, maybe get prep work, tutoring, you have a huge advantage over a student that doesn't have those things. So that makes the score, it's hard for an inner city kid, for example, to score, and many do nonetheless, but they have a bigger hurdle to get the kind of scores that a kid from a top flight public or private school can get.
So in other words, if you have resources, you can game the test.
I tell people only partly in jest that Academy's job is to be a legal cheater. Our job is to train these kids
Interesting.
to improve on the test. And think of this as a move on an athletic field. Think of prepping as a move on an athletic field, or learning an instrument, or lines in a play. If you do the test over and over in practice, you're just simply going to get better.
Yeah, but Mark, my understanding of the biggest test change is that students will get different tests because the computer will spit out different questions based on how you do. Is
Someone's
that
going to track you?
Well,
Is that what you're getting at?
There's 2 parts to that answer, and it's the biggest change. The first part is everyone in the room will have a different test. Forget the adaptive nature I'll get to next. The person sitting next to you will have a different test than yours. I believe that's simply a plain attempt to stop cheating. You can't look at the person next to you and see what they're answering. Not only is it online, but they have a different test. They're going to have 17 is going to be a different question for John than Mary.
So you can't use AI to help you with the test.
No.
Well, that was one thing I was wondering as well. Aside from AI, is this some sort of response to the Varsity Blues matter and all the cheating that happened just a couple years ago?
That was pretty genius, frankly. That guy did it. It hinged on you moving your test center to one of his. And to do that was very simple. You said, I've got a wedding that day in Texas, and can I take the test there? Yeah, sure. And you take the test at his test center, and he either gave you the answers or he had someone else take the test. Just sit there.
That wouldn't have prevented Varsity Blue because he actually, I agree, had someone take the test for you. But you won't be able to really move test centers, correct?
No, I don't know that. You still go to a test center, so I guess that same argument still applies. But obviously, they're paying much more attention. That was as he called it, a side door. And of course, the bad part of that was that he had athletic coaches letting a guy who lives in a desert get in on the crew team kind of thing.
But the question is, now that everybody has a different test, how do you compare? How can a school say, look at Johnny Smith versus Johnny Jones, and if they both have a 1300, how do you compare? Because they're 2 different tests.
Right. Not all 1300s are created equal with an adaptive test, right?
Yeah, that's correct. And of course, some kids are better at certain phraseology, even though you end up with the same score, you might do well on certain questions that the other guy didn't do well on. But it comes out to the same score because vice versa on other questions. But there is no comparative value that I can see. And I haven't even gotten to the big change.
Oh, give us the big change.
Wait,
Take us there.
I will. One more comment, though, on the sitting next to people with different tests. The College Board maintains that the tests, no matter being different, they're equivalent. Well, that's a value judgment. And I don't know how you can really ascertain that or say it with a straight face. If it's a different test, by definition, it's not comparable. So
You're right.
So that's a fairly big change right there. But here's the killer. The tests are now going to be adaptive, meaning I think I mentioned before that when you do the verbal part, the reading and the grammar, they're going to be 2 modules. And the same thing with math, 2 modules. So when you finish the first one, say the reading and grammar, the program is going to analyze how you did and either give you harder questions for the second module or easier ones. So if you screw up early on, even if you're brilliant and then just half asleep and start off slowly, you're going to get easier questions. Same thing in the math. After the first module, they're going to adjust the following questions. That also will adjust the score you can get. The maximum score is going to stay still 1,600, 800, 800 on the 2 sections, which is pretty hard to get, by the way. But the maximum score now will be essentially 1,200. So if you get in both sections the easier second module, your score will be capped in each section at 600. So 2 would be 1,200. Even if you answer the second module, both the verbal and the math perfectly, your score can't go over 1,200, or maybe it's 1,225. It's not specific, but it's low 1,200s, and it's nowhere near 1,600. Now, if you do well in the sections, you get the harder questions and your maximum score could be the 1,600. But this means, again, everyone is taking a different test. When you start changing the second module from the first module, and by the way, the first module was already different, and now you're going to change the second one, what possible value do 2 scores have when it'd be like a batter's batting average when they're in a different ballpark against a different pitcher? It's not the same ball game.
Mark, will colleges have any way of knowing that, let's say Kristina and I both took it, I got an easy version, she got a hard?
Not in anything I've read. I don't believe so. It's a very good question, but I don't think colleges will know. College Board has been quiet on that, and colleges have been crickets on this. They haven't said anything basically about this new test. Part of that is because it's not in their ballpark yet. The kids that are going to be taking this test are going to be next year's juniors. They don't apply until the fall of senior year. So we're 2 years away from colleges even having to think about these scores. Do they matter or not?
Well, it's interesting to think about the change, really significant changes in the SAT, coupled with the affirmative action ruling from the Supreme Court, how the trickle-down effect of both those changes on the college admissions landscape. It's going to be really significant.
Well, certainly certain minorities are going to have a harder time. They're not getting favoritism theoretically on paper. And is that good or bad? We could argue the point, but both sides have plenty of value in the argument. But yeah, in my mind, this new SAT will be of no value whatsoever to colleges because its only value is comparative. And that's a limited value. But if you take the comparison value away, what's left? They got a score.
So what is ACT going to do? Are they going to sit back and hold the course in what that test is?
So far, the ACT has said they are not doing anything except they're investigating going online with their test. And the SAT was already been online abroad. If you're a student taking it abroad and want to apply to a U.S. college, which many do, that is currently the new version of the SAT, and it's online. The ACT, all they've said is they're looking into going online, away from paper tests. Now, here's a problem for a company like mine. There are no paper tests anymore. The College Board currently puts out a big blue book, has 8 practice tests. And kids, that's how we give kids homework, and that's how they improve. They do the tests.
Materials for practicing and so on and so forth.
There are no materials now. I don't have any way of having a tutor sit with a student and go over the questions and answers. It's not on paper. It's not there. You can't do it on computers.
Mark, I'm wondering, irrespective of the changes to SAT, let's set that aside for a moment. As things currently stand, in your opinion, do colleges and universities prefer the SAT over the ACT or vice versa?
No, they did 20 years ago, 15 years ago, they clearly did. The East Coast was an SAT area largely, they preferred the SAT. So if you were UVA, Harvard, any East Coast team.
You wanted an SAT.
Same thing with the West Coast. They wanted SATs, basically. The Midwest has always been the ACT home. But that all changed, I don't know, 2012 kind of thing. All colleges then and now say that they don't have a preference. And of course, many colleges have gone some are test blind. If you turn in a test, they won't even consider it. But many are test optional. So many kids have opted out of even taking the test because that's no fun. If you really want to do well, you pretty much have to prep, and that's expensive and time consuming. And these kids are busy. Junior year is a really busy year for a high school kid. So many of them have opted to go test blind. And of course, any student who, forget just not wanting to bother, any student who knows they're a weak test taker or maybe takes the test one time and is very disappointed. Of course, they're not turning that score in and they're not going to take it again. So test optional is still, it helps. If a school's test optional, you can turn in a good score. It helps in two ways. It's a tiebreaker for a student that looks like you on paper without a score. And it's also a help for merit aid. Almost all colleges consider if they get a score, it's a factor in, and colleges are really expensive. So getting merit aid is a big plus. But you're only turning in a good score. So you can see what that does to the average scores that colleges
Right. Average scores now higher. I'm going to have two follow-up questions based on what Kristina said. One is, now with the change of the SAT, would you recommend students just stick with the ACT because it'll give, pardon?
Completely. Partly because I'm on it. I've already started talking to parents whose kids are rising juniors. We're not tutoring the SAT. I can't do it. And I also don't think you should take it. If you're going to take the test, take one that matters. Why take a test that's meaningless?
And then my other follow-up is something that you said. If it's going to be online and it's difficult for you to get practice materials, are you just going to tutor with like general testing strategy?
Well, we're doing that with some kids. We have we're set up to do that with some rising juniors who know they are not taking a paper test in the fall. They're taking the first in March, the first new format. And the mom said to me, since the material is largely the same, I understand the timing and all those things are different, but can you just tutor for the current SAT using paper tests? She'll be better, won't she, at the new SAT?
That's a great question.
Of course she will be. And we are doing that with some kids. And I've suggested that to some moms, but it's still not prepping them for the exact same test. So that, as a businessman, that makes me a little uncomfortable taking your money, but I'm preparing you for something you're not going to do.
So what are you going to do?
Just ACT. And so unless something changes, now we're still a ways away from next March. If there are sufficient numbers of online practice tests and they become accessible somehow, I'm not a computer geek, so I don't know what that means, but if there's some way we can use them sitting down one-on-one with a kid, of course we'll do that. Except again, I think it's hard for me to justify to a mother, why are you going to take the SAT? Why is your student taking the SAT? It's a pointless test now. And I think colleges will come to that conclusion. Now, if you get a 1500, whether it's a different test or not, of course, that's an indicator that you're a pretty good student, at least at this type of work. Does it compare to another 1500 or 30? I don't think so, but a strong score is a strong score. I think they're dumbing down the test, and I think it'll be easier to get a pretty good score if you take it.
Mark, how would you respond to someone a listener out there who might just say, geez, this guy's in the test prep business and it's sour grapes for the SAT because now you've said you can't tutor on the SAT. It's just your business interests are driving your opinion of the test changes. How would you respond to that?
I think the colleges are going to have the same business interest. And they're going to be making the same evaluation I am. How valuable is this number? As I said before, they haven't gotten there yet. They don't have to. It's not even on their radar. Another interesting wrinkle in this is the state of Ohio currently requires, as a diploma requirement, graduation requirement, that all public and parochial, not private schools, but public and parochial, give their junior class either an SAT or an ACT.
For free.
For free. Yes. And the school picks the date and they pick which test. And some schools pick ACT, like Solon, West Geauga, but many schools pick SAT, like Orange and Kenston and Chagrin Falls. The SAT they're going to be able to give, and they typically do this in the spring, so the SAT they're going to have available to them is going to be the new format. Are they going to give that SAT as a graduation requirement, or are they going to go to ACT? I would think they'd go ACT, but I don't know. I've asked a couple of college guidance people, and they say, it's not on our radar yet. That's so far ahead.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I would say that, look, you can't deny, especially with the test optional, that there's a positive inference by submitting a score.
Correct.
And I don't know if that's going to change. So it is still important. And studying, practice makes perfect with this test. And there are some good free resources available. We can't deny that. But Mark, after having 3 kids go through it, no matter what the free resource is, it helps to have a human being sit with you and explain things, doesn't it?
Not quite the same as working with the tutor.
Yeah, the one-on-one is very different than doing it yourself, partly because when you miss a question, it might be because you don't understand how to do it, not just a casual error like I forgot to bring a minus sign down. The other thing is motivation. None of the humans are very good at doing things we don't particularly enjoy. And prepping on your own
Very true.
is difficult to sit there. And plus, when you prep, you're not taking a 3-hour test 8 o'clock on a Saturday morning. You do a math test for practice and you get up in the middle of it and go get a soda or something. And it's just very different on your own, even if you do it. And one of the reasons that my business is attractive to parents is it's a way of, in effect, forcing their kids to do it. It's like a doctor's appointment. You got to go meet with this person, do the homework, and just take this seriously. It's costing me a lot of money.
Yep.
And doing it on your own just isn't the same motivation. Very few kids are successful at doing it on their own. Some are, and there are some kids that are driven for this kind of thing. But I think the answer to your earlier question, is this self-serving? Of course it is. It's my business. And I want it to work as well as possible. The good news is tutoring works. And it's very rewarding, especially for my tutors, when you raise a kid's score 250 points on the SAT. You take them from 1150 to a 1500 or something. That's very
big jump.
Yeah. And it happens. It sounds incredible, but it's a function of the kids putting in the effort. And again, they're the same tests every time, different material, but they get used to the material. It brings back stuff like the math they may have had 2 years earlier and have basically largely forgotten since 9th grade.
There's so much to consider now for family planning for the future with the college process, but this has really been a wonderful discussion that's chock full of good information for parents to be aware of as they plan for the future in the college process with their children.
And again, another difficult decision, SAT versus ACT, or whether you should take it at all. Lots to think about. You got to know your kid.
Absolutely.
Another point, the test may become more available to companies like mine because there are huge national tutoring companies like Princeton Review, Kaplan. They don't want to stop tutoring in the SAT. Some of them are making their own tests, trying to divine how's this test going to look. That doesn't work very well. But they've got a lot of incentive to get something out there that little companies like me can use and students can use.
What's the saying? Necessity is the mother of invention. So there you go.
The good one, Supler. That's a good one. Mark, it's been such a pleasure.
Feel free to reach out to Mark Coffin at Academy Custom Test Prep. Thanks for joining us, Mark.
It's my pleasure. Thanks. Have a good day.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to Real Talk with Susan and Kristina. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to our show so you never miss an episode. And leave us a review so other people can find the content we share here. You can follow us on Instagram. Just search our handle @StoneSupler. And for more resources, visit us online at studentdefense.kjk.com. Thank you so much for being a part of our Real Talk community. We'll see you next time.